One of the things I recommend before you even put your pencil to paper is to try and check the angles of the object that you're drawing. So in this case, I'm doing a pet portrait and I'm starting off with the back part of the dog. When drawing the contour of the form, so in this case, the dog, you want to check the different angles. So I'm just holding up my pencil and lining it up to show you how many different angle changes there are that occur just within her back. But there's also some on her head. If I go to her hind end right there, the back of her leg, there's an angle change where the blanket covers. So you want to start paying attention to the minute shifts of the angle. You want to think of it almost like in geometrical terms. This is going to help you to draw it more accurately, to notice all those small shifts. And we're going to use angular transfer in order to get the correct angles. Remember, we've talked about that term before. I'm going to show it to you again and how to do it. So there are really two big techniques that I use when I'm drawing a contour line drawing. I use angular transfer and I also use measuring. So we're sizing up on this. So measuring is a little bit harder because we're not going in the correct size. We're sizing it larger. So I'm just showing you right there. I'm doing angular transfer. I'm holding my pencil up to the angle on the photograph and my photo is clipped to my board. And I lock my elbow at that angle and I transfer it over to my paper. Now I work relatively quickly with angular transfer. That's easy and comfortable for me to do, but it's okay if you take your time. And again, you have to lock your arm at that same angle. You hold it up against the photo and transfer it to your paper in order to get it. Now you're seeing I'm also putting tick marks on there. I've actually switched over to a charcoal pencil. I want you to use graphite pencil. The reason I switched over to charcoal is so that you can see it, because I realize when I make these videos that it's very hard to actually see the graphite pencil stroke. So I switched to a charcoal. There's the angular transfer happening. So I'm holding it up, aligning it, and I'm drawing it in place. And notice how I hold my pencil far back when I'm doing that. Here's another angle that I'm getting and transferring it into place. This sounds tricky, but it's actually pretty easy to do. I want you to try it. And I know it's a new thing and I've only mentioned it a few times. This technique has so helped me out, and I think it's going to help a lot of you guys too. And you can see, like, once you get the hang of it, it's not time consuming at all. It actually saves you time because you don't have to make corrections. So about this process, we're drawing it out with graphite pencil on a white piece of paper. This is not going to be the final version of your drawing. We're drawing it once here so that we can make corrections and fine tune. And that's because some of you are working with difficult subject matter and stuff that you may not have a lot of experience with, like drawing a portrait. Or maybe you don't have that much experience with drawing cars, and this gives you a chance to make a mistake and correct it. So what we're doing is we're drawing on white paper. You're drawing your total outline. And I want you to treat it as though you're working on the final one, because it does need to be correct in terms of proportion and placement. What I don't want to see is students shading in. You don't need to. As you're doing your drawing, it's important to check for negative spaces. Like there's a negative shape right in between the top part of her leg and her tummy area and elbow. So you want to see that space as a shape, and that's going to help you too. No matter what your subject is, proportions are important. Proportions refers to how one shape relates to another. So when I'm talking about proportions on a person, I'm talking about the proportions of their face or the proportions of their body, how like the head relates to the neck and the shoulders. In this case, I'm looking at the dog's proportions. I'm taking the measurement of her head. I'm actually going to take the height. So I'm taking my pencil tip up to the top of her head and pinching off. I'm comparing the height to the width of her head. Her head's kind of square shaped. And then I'm seeing how many widths of her head will fit within her body. This stuff sounds difficult, and it is. It is difficult, but it helps you to get the proportions correct. And again, it's one of those things that can save you from making mistakes. Putting together a drawing is like assembling a jigsaw puzzle. Some subjects are just more difficult than others, so you're going to have to try measuring or gauging it. And here's how I start a face, and this is how I start a human face too, is I start off with tick marks. I'm trying to get the placement of the eyes, the nose ratio. And then I shift things as I need to. By the way, I noticed that those eyes, her eyes, aren't perfectly horizontal. They're kind of angled, slanted in a little bit. Take your time on this drawing. I want you to spend at least an hour trying to draw it correctly. It may take you more than that. It depends on what you're drawing. But accuracy is super important. What you see on this paper, we're going to be transferring onto your final draft paper, which is high quality paper. If your animal has a coat pattern, it's important that you draw that too. Same thing goes with if you're drawing a person and you're drawing the hair, you'd want to draw that in as well. And I am going to outline some of the shadow areas, but not everything. So we're going to keep this drawing somewhat simple, but simple doesn't mean that it's not accurate. I went ahead and worked off camera trying to get some of the drapery folds in place, and there's a lot of angled lines too. Sometimes I do like to hold my drawing so I can look at it up close and get some of the details, but you don't have to get as many details on the background as you do on your subject. So just realize that. At this stage in the drawing, I want you to stop and call me over so I can give you some teacher feedback. And I'm going to take a look and I'll give you some pointers on what's working, and I'll also let you know if there's anything that needs to be corrected at this stage. The next step is to take tracing paper, and I actually taped 2 pieces of tracing paper together to make a larger sheet, and clip that onto your board so you put it on top of your drawing. I did use a little bit of blue tape to keep it from falling down because it was doing that, and you want it to be, of course, locked into place. So I used some blue painter's tape. Next, you trace over every line that you've made, and you want to press pretty hard when you're doing this. Next, you're going to remove the tracing paper from your paper, so pull it off the board. Once you have your tracing paper off, you're going to take your original white paper off the board as well, and you're going to flip that tracing paper so that it is mirror image. So you're actually working on the back side of the tracing paper. So here's the back side. And then you're going to take vine charcoal and you're going to shade that back side in. And I am using the tip of this. I'm trying to get that whole paper to turn completely gray. This part's actually really fun. So underneath is the good quality paper, and I've taped my drawing so that the charcoal side is now touching my good quality paper. And I've also secured the tracing paper by taping it into place. You can use clips, but I'm using tape here, just a couple pieces, and then retracing. So yes, there's some tracing involved, but this is going to lead to a vine charcoal transfer. Okay, so here is the unveiling. I'm going to gently pull off the tissue paper. The tissue paper, as long as it transferred correctly, can now be discarded. Now you might see some modeling of the charcoal. You can see like there's some stains in places. I'm not going to worry too much about it unless it's on an area that's going to be light in value. So if I'm looking at my reference picture, I'm like, uh-oh, that's part of her white coat. Let me go in there and clean it up. So you should do that too. Once you've erased all the charcoal that's not where you want it, then you can actually start shading for real. And I do recommend you start off lightly with vine at first, and then you go for the compressed charcoal on top of a light shading of vine.